Right, hello everyone, and welcome to today's candidate forum for positions 1 and 4 for the Bend City Council. We're going to begin here in just a moment, but before I introduce our moderator, we're going to just kind of review some brief housekeeping ground rules for today's forum. So basically how the forum is going to work is we're going to go by position. Each position will have 2 minutes to respond to some questions, and then we will have some Q&A at the end. So since you're joining us online, I know this is kind of a new format, and thank you for joining us via Facebook and YouTube. We encourage you to submit your questions through the comments section, type those in, and then we'll have some time at the end to share those with our candidates where they can respond to some of your questions. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started, and I'm going to hand it over to our moderator, Lee Anderson. A lot of you may know Lee Anderson, probably a familiar face as a news anchor with KTVZ Channel 21. Lee, welcome.
All right. Thank you very much, Tyler. Once again, it is my pleasure to be hosting this round of candidate forums hosted by the Central Oregon Association of Realtors. It's really a great service that to the community that they do. Today we're going to be talking to candidates for the Bend City Council positions number 1 and number 4. We're going to start with position number 1 today. And as a matter of full disclosure before we get started, the Central Oregon Association of Realtors PAC, Political Action Committee, has supported Justin Livingston and Michael Hughes. Michael Hughes will be up a little bit later in position 4. And more disclosure, I have no part of the Central Oregon Association of Realtors other than being here to moderate these forums. As a newsman, I remain neutral in these types of things. Okay. We did a coin toss earlier to see who gets to start first, and Melanie Keebler won. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the candidates introduce themselves and give an opening statement, briefly tell us who you are, why you're running for Bend City Council, and you're going to have 2 minutes each. So let's get it underway. Melanie Keebler for position number 1, Bend City Council. Hello, Melanie, and welcome. Tell us about yourself and why you want to be on the Bend City Council.
Thanks, Lee. So I'm Melanie Keebler. I am running for position 1 on the Bend City Council. I'm running because I want to bring my perspective as a career public servant to the council, and I want to be a bold, positive leader for the challenging times ahead. I grew up here in Bend. I graduated from Bend High, went to college in Michigan, and then came back to Oregon for law school. I started working for the public as a state prosecutor, working on the coast and in the valley, and then I became a victims' rights attorney for the Oregon Crime Victims Law Center, a nonprofit. I moved back to Bend to raise my young daughter here and be close to my family. We know we're going to have to help our residents and our economy recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, but that doesn't mean that a lot of the issues we're facing as a city have gone away. I want to lead on making our transportation system more safe and connected, making Bend affordable by providing more housing and childcare opportunities, and making Bend a leader in the fight against climate change while growing our own local green economy. I want to make sure that as we change and grow as a city, everyone here shares in the prosperity of that growth. Bend should be a welcoming city for everybody. Throughout my career as a public servant, I've had experience listening to differing viewpoints, finding a fair solution, and making sure that everyone feels truly heard. I will listen to all the voices in Bend and collaborate with private partners, nonprofits, and government entities to find community-based solutions to the problems that we're facing. We know Bend is going to continue to grow quickly, and we want to make sure, as I said, everyone shares in that growth. I'm ready to lead in the city that I grew up in and that I love. Thanks.
All right, Melanie, you didn't use all your time, but that's okay. Thank you very much. Reminder to whomever is in the back running the clock, that clock did not start there, so just kind of going by the time there. And we'll do the same, I guess, with you, Justin. Position number 1, candidate Justin Livingston. Justin, you have 2 minutes. Tell us who you are and why you want to be on the City Council.
Thank you, Lee. I also want to thank the Central Oregon Association of Realtors for hosting this forum, to News Channel 21, and to Lee Anderson for being here for moderating. I look forward to the opportunity to let everybody know about me and why I'm running for re-election to the Bend City Council. I'm a native Oregonian, a small business owner, managing principal real estate broker, and Bend City Councilor. I've lived in Bend for the last 20 years. My wife, Carrie, and I have 2 amazing kids, 11 and 14. When I ran 4 years ago, I was concerned about Bend's affordability. When my wife grew up here and graduated high school in the late 80s, there wasn't a lot of opportunity in Bend, which forced her to leave Bend and seek opportunities at other places. Thankfully, that worked out well for me because we met in Salem and, of course, got married. But my concern is not only just for my kids, but for other kids and other people in this city. They're being priced out of this city. What I want to make sure is that all kids, after they graduate, high school, if they go away to college, great. But at least there's opportunities here, and there will be opportunities here in the future. But where are we pricing them out? And they'll have to leave for other reasons. And so I really want to make sure that Bend is an affordable place for all people, and it's a place that people can have great careers, and we have a vibrant economy. But it's a city that works for all people. So I look forward to the opportunity to discuss and for you to learn more about me during this forum, and I just appreciate the opportunity for being here. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Justin. Okay, ready for the questions now. Okay, Melanie, we're going to begin with you. This question is a lengthy one, so I will address you, and then when I give that one to you, Justin, I will look at you as well, but this is a lengthy one, okay? It's our first question, ready to go. Housing supply is lacking in Bend, and affordability remains a challenge. The City Council set an aggressive goal of 3,000 housing units by the end of 2021 to help address the problem, and has passed some code changes and other policies to help get there. If elected, what new housing ideas and strategies would you bring to the council to help address the community's housing challenges?
Thanks, Lee. So I think the question has the premise, and everyone knows that we are in a housing crisis here in Bend and in Oregon as well. And we need more homes to be built to bring the average price of housing down and make homeownership more accessible to more people. So I support what the city has done, especially on our really great affordable housing committee, bringing lots of really good affordable housing projects with the dollars that they do have to our city. And those are for people, kind of on the lower income scale. What we need, especially in Bend, is investment in some of this middle housing for middle income working families. Those are people kind of in the middle of our income range in Bend that can't really find like a starter home or a place to kind of get into that home ownership market. So I think we really need to incentivize building homes of all different types. We need a diversity in our housing stock in Bend, and that's going to allow us to have homes for all different types of people that live and move here. I support the code revisions, especially that are going to be coming down from the state level to help us build more duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, condos, different types of homes. I support city-led efforts for code changes like microhouses and tiny homes that is moving through the city right now. And so I think the idea that I would bring and the perspective I would bring is if we're going to incentivize this type of housing, we have to be careful not to put onerous regulations on the code we're putting in so that it makes these housing projects not pencil out for developers. Some of the areas I want to focus on are making sure we don't have onerous parking requirements, onerous setbacks, or other code barriers basically to getting these houses built. I also want to point out it's important for us to address the needs of our unhoused community as well. And some of these different housing types, especially the micro homes and the tiny homes, can be a real asset for us in trying to take a housing first approach to help our unhoused neighbors.
All right, thank you very much, Melanie. Justin, I'm going to turn a little bit now and address you with this question. Same question. Housing supply is lacking in Bend and affordability remains a challenge. The City Council set an aggressive goal of 3,000 housing units by the end of 2021 to help address the problem, and has passed some code changes and other policies to help get there. If elected, what new housing ideas and strategies would you bring to council to help address the community's housing challenges?
Thank you. I appreciate the question. The road to 3,000, as the council's goal is known, I was really a leader on making sure that happened. And that, because what I wanted a very aggressive goal. Because sometimes ideas get kind of filtered before they ever get to council. And I wanted to indicate to our committees, our staff, and to the community that we want to evaluate any and all ideas. And that aggressive goal actually has resulted in a lot of great ideas coming forward. I support a lot of those ideas. One of the things we do need to do is be respectful, though, of existing neighborhoods. And so that way we don't reduce the quality of life in Bend as well. The approach that I've taken since even being on Ben's Affordable Housing Advisory Committee for the 2 years prior to being on council is I've taken an all of the above approach. We really need a housing diversity. For a long time, Ben was very focused on single-family detached. We still need to provide land for that, but we also need a wider variety of housing types because people need different housing types depending upon where they're at in their lives. What's good today for me, having a big backyard with kids, isn't necessarily going to be that way when the kids are gone and we're retired. That we want a little less maintenance so we can enjoy life a little bit more. So we need to have housing options that meet people's needs and get them into the right housing at the right time. One of the ideas one of the requirements actually of our 2016 urban growth boundary expansion was that the city has to have a next urban growth boundary expansion within 5 years. And so one of the things that I'll be pushing for in the next biennium is another urban growth boundary expansion. And then we also need to follow it up with an urban area reserve, which would actually go out and look 50 years. Instead of having the city looking just 20 years at a time, we'll actually go out and look 50 years. And so we know where Ben's going to grow and how it's going to grow.
All right, thank you, Justin. Your time's up. Okay, and I apologize to the candidates today, all of you. When that says 0, I will interrupt you. All right. So please look at the monitor for the time, so you know you can keep within the time boundaries. All right. Second question, and this one goes to Melanie Keebler. Melanie, question number 2. What are your top 3 goals or priorities if elected to the Bend City Council, and how do you keep other issues and competing priorities from diverting your focus away from these areas?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, Lee, because City Council really has a hand in so many of the ways that our city is growing, developing, and the way our city government serves the residents of Bend. So some of my priorities that I mentioned in my opening, and I think we're going to get to transportation, I think, next, so I won't go into it too much, but a big priority of mine is making our transportation system safe and connected. And if the voters approve the transportation bond this year, we will have some funds to start making some inroads on some of the projects that are long overdue in our city. I really want to focus on that connectivity so that it's convenient and easy for people to get across town no matter what mode of travel they're using, and that safety so that especially our vulnerable users on bikes or walking or rolling around town feel empowered to use those modes of travel. Some other priorities for me, as I mentioned, is affordability in Bend. And that crosses a lot of areas, but I think that's a lens that I'll be bringing to decisions on housing, especially land use stuff. And if we're looking at partnering with the chamber on increasing our childcare slots in Bend, which is an issue personal to me. I waited over a year and a half on a list to get my daughter into daycare. And that's just not acceptable for a lot of people that are trying to move here or live here in Bend. So that affordability piece is a priority for me. And then, like I said, making Bend a leader on climate change. That issue is here front and center for us. In the past week or so, we've had it roll into town, so to speak, and get in our faces, and we need to be a leader on that. And I think that will gel with some of the planning that we're looking at doing, as well as helping us think about diversifying our economy and growing that kind of green businesses in Bend. I think as far as being distracted, I mean, I think that's part of a counselor's job, is to really focus on the issues that they have as priorities, but make sure you're not neglecting the day-to-day, making sure the city is running efficiently, making sure we're providing good services to our customers, our residents here in Bend. So I think that's a balancing act that I'm prepared to take on, and I'm happy to do so.
All right. Cleared with 4 seconds to go, Melanie. Thank you. All right, Justin, same question. What are your top 3 goals or priorities if elected to the Bend City Council, and how do you keep other issues and competing priorities from diverting your focus away from these areas?
I will continue, as the last 4 years, of focusing on having the city do its core services and do the core services well. Those include housing. We need to have affordable housing, and we need to have housing that's affordable by design, not just by subsidy. Infrastructure investment. In my time on council, we've invested greatly in transportation infrastructure and sewer infrastructure, and those infrastructure pieces are very, very well linked to our housing affordability as well. Because if if the city hasn't done a good job investing in that infrastructure and the developer has to take that on themselves, that raises the cost of housing. And then the other pieces that I want, how do we stay focused, is really just having goals. And that goal setting process at the beginning of each council every 2 years is very important. And setting those aggressive goals is a key part of what we do. And that's, there's a lot of investment and time and effort that goes into that. But it really sets the work plan for the next 2 years and the budget for the next 2 years for the city. And then issues always come up, and they always will. But we have to, if we have something new come up, what else comes off, and what's the give and take, or is it an issue that can actually just wait until the next biennium and then compete with those other ideas for the next goal setting? The last real key issue that we really need to work on is the economy. A lot of people have been negatively impacted by the effects of COVID-19 and what the economy has brought. And so that'll be really a key issue for me, is to get, making sure that the city is not in the way of business and we can have businesses grow.
All right. Thank you very much, Justin. Third and final question for candidates of position number 1. Melanie, what does an efficient transportation system mean to you, and what type of infrastructure do you believe best supports it?
Thanks, Lee. So efficient transportation around town means to me that people really have a meaningful choice on how they get around town. Maybe they want to ride their bike for a short errand down to the corner store, to the grocery store. Maybe they need to drive their car to take kids somewhere, or to take goods or services somewhere around town. Maybe they enjoy walking and are feeling safe to do that, to walk up to a park or a pub or a neighborhood store and enjoy, that health benefit as well. And I also think we want to make sure, when we're talking about people moving around town, we're talking about accessibility too. So part of an efficient transportation system for me is not just, cars, bikes, walking, but also people who use wheelchairs or have mobility issues, and whether or not we're investing in, like I said, making a connected network of accessible trails and sidewalks. Right now in Bend, there's many places around town where there's inadequate sidewalks, or there just aren't sidewalks. And that's something I'd like to see be part of our continuing investment going forward. The other thing too is the way that Bend has developed and sort of spread out, it hasn't been conducive to connectivity, especially east-west connectivity. And so I think we need to continue to invest in those solutions for people that are going across town, again, so they feel safe and that it's efficient. One thing I like to point out is that if we're encouraging more people to walk or bike around town, those are people that maybe aren't driving to do those errands, and those are cars that are off the road, making it a better experience for people that do drive. So that to me is an efficient transportation system. It's a balanced and equitable system that for all the users that are using the transportation system, and it's safe and helps people get where they need to go.
All right. Melanie, thank you very much. Same question to you, Justin. What does an efficient transportation system mean to you, and what type of infrastructure do you believe best supports it?
Yeah, an efficient transportation system is one that gives people choices, and so that way they can have the transportation options that meet their needs, and for whatever their trips may be, whether that's bike, pedestrian, transit, or cars. I don't believe that we should be socially engineering people out of their cars. I think the city needs to invest in all modes of transportation. We do need to move goods and services and people around our city in all kinds of modes. One of the things that I'm glad Melanie brought this up is the east-west connectivity. We've invested greatly in east-west connectivity since my time being on council. The Empire Corridor, the Murphy Corridor will connect parts, pieces of the city that have been split apart, whether by its railroad, by other barriers, and those corridors are very important and connect all modes of transportation, whether it's bike or pedestrian or vehicles. And then there's lots of ways to make it more efficient, and one of the ways is to make a more connected transportation system and give people options. And so that way they're not only having to just go down Reed Market Road to get east and west, but that Murphy corridor particularly will have a great impact, not only just for people's transportation, but also for public safety. The Bend Fire Department does not go down Reed Market right now because they can't afford to get stopped by a train. And so having that Murphy corridor and having a railroad overcrossing will actually also increase or decrease response times for the fire department. And so all these things are interconnected. Whether it's transportation, housing, public safety, all these things are highly connected.
Can I do a follow-up on that?
You may. You get 1 minute.
Thank you. I'll wait to get that up there. I don't want to go over my time. Okay, thanks. So I just want to follow up on something that Justin said. He said he doesn't think we should be socially engineering people out of their cars. And I just want to make the point that Bend's transportation system, as it's been developed, has been developed to encourage people to drive. When you make wider roads, when you don't build infrastructure for other modes, when you put in lots of drive-throughs, you're building a system that's based around cars, and more people are going to drive. So I think that when I'm talking about getting people out of their cars, that to me is a meaningful choice. Myself, I've been trying to bike more. I have a bike that I can put my 2-year-old on the back of, and there are places that I don't feel comfortable riding with her on the back of my bike, even though there might be a bike lane that's not protected, or a street that has a sharrow on it. I don't feel safe, and that induces me to get in my car when I need to take her somewhere, when I'd probably rather take my bike. So I just want to make the point that how we design our transportation system will change the behavior of people. It already does, and we can start to combat that and start to make a more equitable system.
All right, right on time. Justin, you have a minute.
Okay, thank you. I actually agree with Melanie. She should feel safe on her bike, wherever she's riding, and we do need to make those investments to make sure that happens. And a lot of that's going to be partnerships with the Bend Park and Rec District to expand their urban trail system. So we're absolutely need to be making those investments. But at the same time, we shouldn't be making it more difficult or narrowing roads to travel by car, or creating more congestion in vehicle travel just to be able to force people onto their bike. We need to give people options. People need to have the freedom to make the decisions that they want to make, and however that transportation mode looks like for them.
All right, thank you very much. Well, those are our 3 questions today. Again, we're taking questions on YouTube and Facebook. If you'd like to send in your questions, we'll have a Q&A for these 2 coming up in just a few minutes. We're not done yet, Melanie. We still have your closing statements here, and you'll each have 2 minutes for that. And then I ask you hang out in the audience there for a little bit. Our audience is a little bit different this year. We don't have an audience, folks. We're doing this virtually this year. But the candidates seemingly have done very well with this. All right, we're going to get to the closing statements now. Each of you will have 2 minutes, and we'll begin once again with Melanie.
Thanks, Lee. So we've heard a lot today about some of the main things that many in Bend are concerned about: our economic recovery, what our future growth will look like, and how we can plan to make Bend a great place that's affordable and welcoming. We're at a crossroads here in Bend on so many issues, and the next few years are going to be critical in planning for smart growth to help us develop into a sustainable city. I believe I'm the best choice to join our council at this moment. Unlike my opponent, I agree with the decision by the council to act quickly to help our businesses get through the pandemic by opening up street space downtown. I also think that we can make a real difference in the fight against climate change, and that leadership on the city level is important on that issue. I think a lot of Bend agrees that our environment is really essential, not only to our local ecosystem, but also to our local economy. I really think that we need to move forward boldly on transportation, like I talked about today. Also housing, childcare, and all the other things that make Bend a real great and livable place for everyone. I want us to reach our potential as a really great, welcoming city that benefits obviously from our surrounding natural beauty. I will improve our community engagement and make sure we're getting all voices to the table to help the council make critical decisions on all these issues about our future. I hope I've earned your vote today. Please reach out to me with any further questions. You can go to my website, which is melaniekeebler.com. I'm also on social media. And thanks so much to CORE for the opportunity to speak to voters today.
Melanie Keebler, candidate for Bend City Council, position number 1. Thank you very much. Justin Livingston, you have 2 minutes for your closing statements.
Great. Thank you again to the Central Oregon Association of Realtors, News Channel 21, and to Lee Anderson. 4 years ago, I promised to tackle Bend's big problems, like crumbling streets and a lack of affordability in housing and many other aspects, without raising taxes on people already struggling to make ends meet. Since entering office, Ben has repaired a record number of lane miles of streets without resorting to a regressive gas tax, made key improvements to our transportation system, like the Empire and Murphy corridors, and implemented a wide variety of affordable housing policies, a lot of which are now resulting in the largest affordable housing project to ever be built in Bend, which will break ground later this year. While housing prices continue to increase, we have built the foundation to make a wider variety of affordable housing available to current and future residents. Bend's biggest challenge today is the economic distress caused to residents and businesses by COVID-19. I support efforts to reduce the burden the city places on those affected by the economic slowdown. I'm proud to be endorsed by the Bend Chamber PAC, current Mayor Pro Tem Bruce Abernathy, and former Mayor Casey Rhodes. Thank you for your time today, and I ask for your vote this November. And my website is justinforbend.com, and you can also find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you.
All right, thank you to both of you, Justin and Melanie. Fine job today. We're going to switch out the candidates now. Would the candidates for position number 4, Bend City Council, please come forward. And again, I asked Melanie and Justin to hang around just a few minutes. And after they're done, we'll do the Q&A with them first for purposes of social distancing. And then after they get their questions, then you'll be asked to come back and take some questions from the Facebook and YouTube audiences. All right, so if we could have Rita and Michael come on up, please. And again, prior to today's event, Rita Schenkelberg actually won the... Come on up, have a seat. Wherever's... Rita, you... What's that? Oh, so we're sanitizing. Very good. Thank you very much. Well, welcome back, everyone. A bit of a brief break while we sanitize the situation up here at the front desk, and I want to thank Tyler for coming up and doing that, and certainly, again, thanks to the Central Oregon Association of Realtors for hosting this series of candidate forums this fall. We're going to talk now about Bend City Council position number 4. And today we have Michael Hughes to my right here, and on my left is Rita Schinkelberg. Rita won the coin flip prior to today's event, and she elected to defer. So we're going to begin with Michael Hughes. And Michael, you have 2 minutes to tell us about who you are and why you're running for Bend City Council position number 4.
Thank you, Lee, and thank you to the Central Oregon Area Realtors for putting on this event and News 21. And appreciate being here and the opportunity to speak to the people of Bend about the upcoming election. My name is Michael Hughes. I'm an attorney in town. I'm also a farmer. I live here with my soulmate, Chrissy, my 13-year-old son, and our dog, Ella. And we've lived here for 8 years, and we love the city of Bend and feel very fortunate to live in the city of Bend. And I am a candidate for Bend City Council position 4. 20 years ago, I embarked on a legal career and had really one agenda in mind. And at the time, that agenda probably seemed pretty crazy and out of reach. But that agenda was to change the laws surrounding cannabis. And for the last 20 years, that's what I've worked in my practice was to change the laws surrounding cannabis. And it wasn't easy, it was hard and it's difficult, but we've made a considerable amount of strides since I started practicing law. Now, in Bend, we are at a very important time period in our city, and that's when we're moving from a small lumber town to a larger mid-sized city. And it's going to happen. The growth numbers are occurring. And for Bend to be as great as it is now, because it took a lot of planning and development to get Bend to be as great as it is now, it's going to take even more planning and development and common sense approaches to get Bend to be great in the next 10 years. We are about to surpass the 100,000 population mark, and when you start dealing with a city of that size, we're going to have a bunch of issues that we're going to have to deal with. And one of the most important issues that we're dealing with right now, which was a curveball thrown to all of us, is the COVID-19 pandemic. We're not through that. We still have to get through that. We have major economic problems that are going to be coming down the road because of the pandemic. And then ultimately, Bend, we are seeing huge amounts of growth, and we're going to have to make sure that the city develops itself in a way that the city continues to be great 20 years down the road. And that's why I'm running for city council, because this town has been great to me, and now I feel it's time for me to give back to the city and to provide some of the skills and assets that I have to help the city in its next 10 years of growth.
All right, thank you very much, Michael. Rita Schinkelberg, tell us who you are and why you want to be on the Bend City Council.
Hi, my name's Rita Schinkelberg, and my pronouns are she, her, and they, them, and I'm running for position 4 for Bend City Council. I'm a queer person of color, really excited to be here and running. When I heard the statement that Bend City Council made connected to the murder of George Floyd, I could just really see that there's a lot of growth that needs to happen within Bend City Council in the way that they approach equity and inclusion. And so as I did some more research and as I had some conversations with some city councilors and just really looking at our local government, there's a lot more that local government can do to be more inclusive for community members. So I thought that was incredibly important. And then, of course, I did more and more research and realized that local government impacts the BIPOC community and all of its community members in so many different ways. And how incredibly awesome would it be for a real person to run for Bend City Council, a person who is a renter here. I'm a little bit younger than the average Bend City councilor, and I also have this lived experience as a BIPOC community member. I've been in Bend for the past 5 years, and I've really seen the growth happen. I think it's just so incredibly important that someone who has my lived experience is able to bring that experience to Bend's leadership. And so as we look at kind of having this conversation and being a renter, I think it's incredibly important that as a renter, there's a voice that has experienced the rental market here in Bend and how we can continue to have that conversation on how rentals are a huge part of the housing market here, and we continue to have the conversation about renters and all of the other pieces that definitely impact the BIPOC community here and many other different communities. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Rita. All right, let's get to our questions now. Michael Hughes will begin with you. Here's question number 1. What are your top 3 goals or priorities if elected to the Bend City Council, and how do you keep other issues and competing priorities from diverting your focus away from these areas?
Thank you, Lee. I think obviously the number one priority right now is continuing to deal with the pandemic. We're not through it yet. There's still a number of COVID-19 cases that are happening. We're fortunate to live in an area where our numbers are lower than other parts of the country, and that's good, but we gotta keep an eye on that and make sure that numbers don't rise. But the important part of that too is we've got to start seeing the pathway to getting back to normal. We've got to try to get back to normal some way. There's a lot of people in our community right now who are hurting economically, and we're just, in my opinion, we're just starting to see some of those impacts of the economic damage that the pandemic has caused. So I think the top goal is continuing to deal with the pandemic, but then at the same time, we have to be ready to deal with the economic fallout of the pandemic, and the city council is going to have to try to come up with some creative ways to try to help some of the businesses that have been impacted. Now, part of that's going to involve figuring out what businesses have been impacted, because some businesses have been impacted more than others. So that's going to be part of the process. Obviously, the next big thing for Bend dealing with is the growth that we're having and development. And that is going to, we have to make sure the city remains livable. We have to make sure that we're using smart approaches to commercial development and residential development, so there's a symbiotic relationship between the two, so a person can walk down to the store, ride their bike to the store, and not have to get in their car and drive across town. So we've got to continue to do that sort of development, and we have to make sure Bend is affordable, and affordability isn't just in the housing, it's also attracting businesses that pay more. So we've got to continue to try to attract high-paying businesses to the city. And ultimately, and one of the reasons I ran for mayor 2 years ago was this particular issue, and that is wildfire prevention and preparation for serious wildfire events. I don't think we have to look very far in the past to see that this is a huge problem, and we are sitting in a potential tinderbox here in Bend, and the city council has to work with state and federal officials to make sure that we don't have that happen here in Bend.
All right, thank you very much. Rita, same question to you, and I will repeat it for you.
Thank you.
What are your top 3 goals or priorities if elected to the Bend City Council, and how do you keep other issues and competing priorities from diverting your focus away from these areas?
Yeah, I think that's really, really complicated question. I think that when you really look at city government and how much impact we have on the entire community, we could easily go in about 20 different directions. So my 3 priorities during my campaign is community, housing, and transportation. When I say community, it's about creating inclusivity here in Bend. How do we create Bend City Council meetings accessible for all humans, changing the locations, making sure that people are able to access that, and really understand what's happening in the Bend City Council meetings. Having conversations with the other candidates, and it can be pretty complicated trying to understand those huge bills that people are talking about in those plans. And so how do we have that conversation? How do we bring diverse voices to the table, and how do we get the communities of color really engaged in that conversation? It's about making the platform accessible to them and making it safe, and bring that awareness that there is some pieces that local government can do to make those conversations a lot safer for communities of color. The other pieces is housing. As a renter and as someone that maybe might own a home someday, I'm not sure, is that affordable housing piece. So many humans I talk to here in Bend really don't have a lot of options. It's whatever rental is available. It doesn't matter if it takes all of their paycheck. They need somewhere to live, whether it's just for them or for their entire family. And so how do we prioritize all of those humans who are trying so hard to find somewhere to live and really can't find somewhere to live? And so continuing to have conversations about affordability, and specifically affordable housing. And the other pieces like transportation. As someone who really enjoys walking and biking here in Bend, it should be safe for all people. And not just me going to work, but then safe routes to school. It's also the pieces of, when humans get to go back to school, but the safe routes to school, being able to have bike lanes that are actually protected instead of kind of the bike lanes that feel like this very precarious curb that has a lot of gravel in it. How do we prioritize?
All right, thank you, Rita. Your 2 minutes are up. Second question, and we'll begin with you, Michael. What does an efficient transportation system mean to you, and what type of infrastructure do you believe best supports it?
Thank you, Lee. I think first and foremost, an efficient transportation system can only be defined by one that actually makes it easy to get around the town you live in. So each particular town is probably going to have its own version of what an efficient transportation system is. With regard to Bend, though, I think one of the main things is we have roads that can handle the amount of traffic that we have. I think we do need more and better bike pedestrian pathways that are safe. And in fact, I would support a pedestrian bike pathway that actually connects the east-west to the downtown corridor. And I think that is important because the more people we have on bikes or walking, the less people we have on the road, so they kind of go hand in hand together. And then I think we need to have a public transportation system that meets the community needs. And whether the one we're currently employing does that or not, we probably need to examine that to see if that does in fact meet the community needs. And if it doesn't, what ways can we do to improve that? Because there are a number of people in this town who rely on public transportation, and we have to make sure that that system works for them. So, and with all of those things, we have to have the infrastructure to support that. And that includes better bikes and pedestrian pathways, better roads, safer roads, and ultimately, I do believe we need to examine lowering the speed limit in certain areas. The amount of traffic that we have in these areas, I think we need to re-examine whether or not the current speed limits are appropriate. I think in some particular areas where we're seeing more traffic and more density, we need to consider lowering the speed limit. Now, maybe I'm an old guy who likes to drive slow, but I believe that's important, and I think if you look at any statistics involving auto traffic safety, you will see that fatalities and serious injuries increase with the amount of speed that increases. And with more people driving, I think it's important we re-examine some of the speed limits in our central district area. Downtown seems to be pretty good, but I think there's some areas where the traffic's increased that we need to really examine whether or not the current speed limits are appropriate and safe.
All right, thank you, Michael. Rita, the same question to you. Now, I noticed we didn't get his clock started right away, so we'll give you an extra 5 or 10 seconds. How's that sound?
Sounds great. Thanks,
Same
Lee.
question. What does an efficient transportation system mean to you, and what type of infrastructure do you believe best supports it?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of like talking about it in my previous answer, so I got a little bit ahead of myself. So I really think that it's incredibly important that we look at connectivity, and connectivity has a bunch of different aspects. So not only is it connectivity with roads, but it's also connectivity with sidewalks, and it's connectivity with bike lanes. And the way that we can do that is really having conversations are where we're really missing sidewalks in Bend and how we can make those roads a lot safer. And then another piece of the connectivity is also just when we're looking at Bend as a whole, there is this huge division between east and west. And so how do we create connectivity between that? That's how do we make the road safer? Because really that underpass on Greenwood and Franklin is really scary as like a biker or someone who's walking. And so if we continue to have the conversations about building that safety, it'll be so incredibly important. And the cool part about creating connectivity in bike lanes and sidewalks means that we're going to support the community climate action plan. That's so incredibly important. And as some of the other candidates have talked about, climate action in general is just something that is on the forefront of all our minds. We were encompassed in smoke, and it just did not feel super great. And so the ways that we can kind of decrease our climate footprint and make environmentally conscious decisions is by getting people out of their cars and having people walking and biking. And there are so many different resources here in Bend. There are, electric bikes, there are many different bike shops, and biking is really part of the community and the culture here in Bend. And so that can be a huge part of the transportation piece, and it's also the transportation bond that'll be on the ballot. And the transportation bond is a super great first step towards, making so much more connectivity and increasing the transportation safety here in Bend.
All right.
Thank you, Lee.
Very much, Rita. Third and final question. We begin with Michael. And this is a lengthy one. Housing supply is lacking in Bend, and affordability remains a challenge. The City Council set an aggressive goal of 3,000 housing units by the end of 2021 to help address the problem, and has passed some code changes and other policies to help get there. If elected, what new housing ideas and strategies would you bring to Council to help address the community's housing challenges?
Thank you, Lee. I think one of the first things that needs to be done is we have to fill in our current urban growth boundaries that we've received. We've got to develop that. We have to get ahead of the next urban growth boundary. We have to work with the county on that. and get ahead of that curve so we have more inventory of land to bring in. Because until we have more inventory of land, these other questions aren't going to be able to be answered. And I think if you look at probably the best example of affordable housing we have right now is a project I think it's about to be approved, and I think they're about to start. It's the Stillwater Crossing project. And, you know, I think that's 240 some units in and of itself, or some large amount like that. It's on like 8.5 acres. And what they did there is, it's the only second project in Bend involving affordability where they were able to go get some federal dollars. And that's really to kind of help this along and to make these projects more economical for the developers. We're going to have to bring in some of those federal dollars. And I think part of that is, and another incentive that the city used for Stillwater Crossing was this density bonus. And I think that's an incentive that we can continue to use for affordable housing projects, because we have to incentivize the builders to be able to build them. And, you know, in my opinion, a project like an apartment building or a larger scaled affordable housing is very important. But we do know that this creates problems within the community because some people are opposed to it. And I think if you look at the way the city handled the Stillwater Crossing, they were able to bring some of the communities together that might be impacted by it and made them understand that this was actually good for the city. So I think that's a good common sense development. I think we need more like the Stillwater development project. I also think it doesn't hurt at this point for the city to start thinking about some other incentives to kind of spur some of these affordable housing projects, like potentially waiving some of the system development charges for an affordable housing project. And I think those are incentives that the city can come up with and that would help in the long run to create more of these housing projects.
All right, thank you, Michael. Same question, Rita. Again, this is lengthy. I will read it again. Housing supply is lacking in Bend and affordability remains a challenge. The City Council set an aggressive goal of 3,000 housing units by the end of 2021 to help address the problem, and has passed some code changes and other policies to help get there. If elected, what new housing ideas and strategies would you bring to Council to help address the community's housing challenges?
Yeah. I'm really excited about the code revisions. As someone who's a renter and kind of looking at alternative housing units, it's just so incredibly important that we have that diversity within the neighborhoods in Bend. And it really just changes the narrative here in Bend. I think when we look at kind of a traditional neighborhood, we look at just these single family homes lined up. And I think that that's an idea that isn't going to work in our current housing crisis. And so to bring affordability means that you're increasing the units in the places that people are already living. And then when we bring that diversity of housing units, we're also bringing diverse humans. And we're creating that culture here in Bend that is so incredibly important and can be so incredibly inclusive. So continuing to have conversations about, you know, how do we bring those code revisions to the forefront of City Council's mind and continuing to talk about them and make them happen. I think that's an incredibly important part about the affordability piece. I think it's also about like addressing what affordable housing is for a person who's like living in Bend and they're working for minimum wage versus affordability for someone who maybe has a career, and versus affordability as how we perceive it. I think that it's just astronomical that the median house price here in Bend is $500,000, and I know as a single person in my working profession, that's not something that I'll be able to afford. And so how do we have conversations about what actual affordability looks like here in Bend? And it's about really breaking it down and really seeing, you know, what are humans trying to survive here in Bend, and do we want to keep the people that already live here? I think the answer is yes. And so it's about being really creative about these decisions, whether it's like looking at the kind of code changes, whether it's looking at, you know, what places in Bend do we need to increase the amount of housing, looking at the core area project, you know, conversations about the Bend Central District has been on the forefront of people's minds when we're talking about these density pieces. And so just continuing to have the conversations, I think it's going to take a lot of creativity from the City Council and from city staff to, you know, find solutions to this problem.
All right, thank
Thanks,
you very
Lee.
much, Rita. Okay, those are your 3 questions. Now it's time for your closing statement. You have 2 minutes, and we'll begin with Michael Hughes.
Thank you. Thanks once again, Lee, for moderating this, and COAR for hosting this event. Thank you, Rita, for being here and providing the dialogue. I think the most important part about any election is the fact that the candidates get to present their ideas to the people, and that allows, in many circumstances, allows everybody to listen. And listening is the most important thing, I think, as a society we need to do more of. I don't think we listen to each other enough. And as a city councilor, I would make an effort to listen to anybody and everybody who had an idea on how to make the city better. And really, that's my campaign is focused on what we need to do to continue to make Bend the great city that it is. And in my opinion, to do that, we're going to have to listen to a lot of different ideas. We're going to have to brainstorm. We're going to have to then come up with the best solutions. And I believe that based on my experience, my extensive land use experience in the legal world, my experience in dealing with difficult changes in the legal world, will provide the City Council a pretty good tool to use in the next 10 years, or at least the next few years that I would be on the council. So, and I'm doing so because I appreciate everything that Bend has done for me. I now want to give back to Bend, and I believe that by giving my time to Bend and the City of Council and bringing ideas, and more importantly, listening to all the other ideas that we have in the community, that we can continue to make Bend the greatest city in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Rita Schenkelberg, closing statement, 2 minutes.
Thank you everyone for being here. I think that in very weird times with COVID, I'm grateful for us continuing to have these conversations, and thank you all for hopefully my voice hasn't been too super muffled with me wearing my mask through this conversation. You know, as we're talking about land ownership and having conversations, I just really think to acknowledge the indigenous people that lived here before and how this land was stolen from them. And we continue to have those conversations when we're talking about land and land ownership. I'm really excited to run for Bend City Council. It's incredibly important to me that someone who is a queer person of color has a voice here in the leadership in Bend. You know, I have a very, very unique experience, and I will bring that, and I will bring my creativity, and I will also bring the skills as a mental health therapist to Bend City Council. You know, I've learned so much about problem solving and having conflict resolution conversations and having conversations with people whose values maybe don't align with mine, and really finding the solutions that are super necessary when everyone's voices are coming to the table, and then continuing to bring communities of color to the table and allowing them to have a voice and having the power that they have not had for a very, very, very long time. And so we need to continue to have the conversations that bring communities of color to the table. And also, how do we make Bend, the city of Bend, an inclusive place, is by giving them a platform to have a conversation and have an action plan that follows that. It's so incredibly important to have actions that follow conversations and not just conversations happening. And the way that we do that is to have continued conversation with actions that are moved forward. So you can always email me at ritaforbend@gmail.com. You can also check out ritaforbend.org, or you can find me at Rita for Bend on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you.
Wonderful. 4 wonderful candidates today. Michael Hughes and Rita Schenkelberg for position 4. Thank you very much. Now we're going to hopefully have some questions from our YouTube and Facebook audiences. And I'm looking at the very back of the room where hopefully we'll get this up and running. But terrific job, both of you, and candidates for position 1 as well. Justin Livingston and Melanie Keebler, terrific. Okay, all right, here's a question. And this is, we're just going to keep position 4 candidates up here first. So, you guys ready?
Let's do
Rita,
this.
you won the toss. Would you like to take this first question, or you defer again?
No, I'll take it.
You're going to take it, all right.
Yeah, I'm getting excited about it as we're reading
here it
it.
is. Here we go. It appears that there is a lack of racial and ethnic diversity among decision makers at the local level, and at the same time we see Black, Indigenous, and people of color suffering disproportionately from the pandemic. Why do you think this is, and what can we do to address it?
Oh man, I could talk for a lot longer than 2 minutes about this specific question. But really looking at systemic racism that lives within our systems. You know, with the pandemic happening, it really is a requirement to have a functioning computer, a functioning smartphone, and to have access to internet to get any of the information. And so if you don't have those 3 things, then you're really not going to understand what's happening and what's happening with COVID-19. Not only is it that, but is the information on COVID-19 in the language that you speak, and is it readable in the language you speak? So those are just kind of some systems pieces to have kind of on the forefront of our mind. It's also the piece of, you know, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC community members really don't have as much access to those stable pieces that keep people healthy. You know, whether it's housing, whether it's food, whether it's safe transportation, systemic racism has really made those really difficult for BIPOC community members to access. And if they are able to access it, are they able to access it as much as their white counterparts? And the answer is no. And so how do we create that accessibility? And creating that accessibility means that we address systemic racism at a local government level, and then we work on getting power to those BIPOC community members. And that is going to be a long process, and it's going to be a hard process, and it's a process that the City of Bend can do. And by electing me means that you're going to have that voice on Bend City Council. It's not that you're going to have to reach out for it. It's not that you're going to have to ask other BIPOC community members to do that emotional labor. I will be there, I'm willing, and I am ready to answer those questions.
Okay, Rita, thank you. Well, Michael, your turn. And look, would you like me to read that question again?
No, I think I've been able to read it through the light
Because
here.
it's about a minute long anyway.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of populations in the lower and the middle class have been really hurt by the pandemic. And I think that's across the board. I think it's across the country. I think some areas have been hit harder than others. But I mean, anytime you're dealing with economic issues, the best way to address that is to try to bring some economic vitality. Jobs help people in economic crises. Trying to get people employed helps people in economic crises. So anytime we have an economic crisis, that's where we have to start. And in this particular situation that we find ourselves in, there's a lot of hospitality workers who are out of work, a lot of hotel workers who are out of work. There's a lot of people who are service industry people who have been out of work and have been impacted hardly. And what can we do to address this? Well, we obviously have to continue to follow the science and determine how we're going to continue to deal with the pandemic. But then, as I said earlier, we have to try to get back to normal as fast as possible with regard to the science. If the science says we can start opening up more, we need to do that, because until we can start opening up more, until people can still go back to work, we're going to continue to see these economic hardships. And with anything in our country, the economic hardships tend to fall harder on communities of color, communities who don't have the means to find jobs or make jobs for themselves. So across the board, until we can actually get people back to work, we're going to have this problem. And we have to try to get people back to work as soon as possible. And once we do that, that's going to benefit everybody. But it's not going to fix the long-term problem we've had with racism in this country. That's a completely separate issue that we're going to have to deal with. But as people know, your situation always gets better when your economic situation gets better.
All right, thank you very much. So now I will defer to the Central Oregon Association of Realtors. You want to do one more question for these folks? Okay. And so we'll just we'll begin with, let's see. Can you all read that?
It's a little glary.
Okay, I will read it for you. Tyler, if you would please take off the blue on the font there, so it's a little easier to read black on white. Okay. All right, ready, Rita?
Yeah.
Okay, here's the question sent in. This is a good one too. This is a doozy. What are you going to do about water issues if 70,000 people move into Bend in the next 20 years? We are in a desert region, after all.
Well, I know that we're already having conversations about the water issues. I know there's been conversations about the basin, there's been conversations about Tumalo Creek, so I really think that it's already on the forefront of people's minds. And so I think that there is going to have to be a lot of work on the community level to really address these water issues. You know, that's why it's so incredibly important that we had the Community Climate Action Plan and that so many community members came together to have those conversations. And there is no concrete solution, because 70,000 people is a lot of people. And so I was actually having a conversation about this earlier today, and so from the housing perspective, we can really talk about, water to houses and really talking about xeriscaping and how do we create sustainability within the housing piece. It's also just having conversations about how do we conserve water, at its source, and there are many, many different pieces. I don't think that there is really a concrete way to answer the question because we're not quite sure what that's going to look like, and we have no idea what our climate is going to look like in the next 20 years. As we kind of saw this summer, that wildfires are getting closer and closer, and so, this might not be, this might be 10 years. It could just, there's just so many different parts, and so I think it's a pretty difficult question and a very valid question at that.
Yes, that is a very difficult question. Mike, would you like me to repeat that, or can you read that up there?
No, thank you.
Okay.
When you deal with water here in the high desert, we got to talk about two sources of water, right? We've got surface water, which is our lakes and our streams and our beautiful Deschutes River, and then we've got the aquifers that are underneath us, which are our groundwater. And I have not seen any real recent studies on what the current groundwater levels are within Bend. I know we're under a pretty massive aquifer, but there's different aquifers even in Central Oregon. So 70,000, even the growth that Bend has seen to this date, I think has affected our groundwater. I mean, I think that has greatly affected our groundwater. We hear more and more people out east of town whose wells go dry. And some might blame it on certain crops that are grown, but the reality is we've just have more people who are drawing water from our aquifers, and that's going to continue. How do we deal with that? Oh boy, I think we're still trying to deal with our surface water issues, and that can be dealt with better conservation policies among the farmers and ranchers in the area that could learn to use less water. That's something I think we can fix long term with piping and some additional water conservation. The aquifer level, I don't know, because I have a feeling that our aquifers aren't being charged. We've had pretty low snow counts, and I know our aquifers are likely charged by springs and snow seeping down from the mountains. So I don't know how we deal with that problem, but it's something we're going to have to address, and I think the biggest issue we're going to have to address is to find out what the problem is. I don't think we've done any comprehensive studies on where our current aquifer levels are, and I think that has to be done, because then we have to take into account what are the current aquifer levels, and then based on this growth, how is that going to affect those aquifer levels? And then we better get a plan together pretty quickly to deal with that. And what that plan is, I can't answer until I would see the data on what the aquifers look like.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, I think we're going to swap you out now. Thank you very much, Rita Schenkelberg and Michael Hughes. Great job. And we're going to bring back the candidates for position number 1 after a quick sanitization of the set. And when we right, we're back with candidates from position number 1, Bend City Council, and we had a little Q&A, 2 questions each for the position 4 candidates. So we're going to ask some questions from the audience for Justin and Melanie as well. Okay, so let me take a look at this. Now, in all fairness, this is the first time I've seen these questions, and I'm reading them from about 40 yards away now. What do you think about using hybrid gas/electric buses? Okay, Melanie, you won the coin flip earlier. Do you want to go first?
I did first last time. Let's let Justin
Okay,
go
all right.
first.
Justin
Yeah.
Livingston, you get that question.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. And actually, as the chair of the Bend Metropolitan Planning Organization, I signed a letter in support of a grant that Cascades East Transit made to the federal government to actually to bring in electric buses. I know that there are some municipalities, even in the state of Oregon, like Eugene, that have gone to that. They have experienced some issues, particularly with hilly areas, but I believe that can be overcome. And I think most of the routes that CET deals with are actually relatively flat, so I don't think that we'll necessarily have some of those issues like Eugene saw. But I'm fully supportive of it, and actually signed a letter to the federal government in support of CET's acquisition of the electric buses.
All right. You got that one done in 48 seconds.
Okay.
Melanie, same question to
I
you.
might use all my time. So I think this is a great question. I think this sort of goes to what are we investing in our transit system here in Bend? And I do think we really do need to invest in public transit in Bend and make it sustainable and make it fit the size of our city as we grow. So I totally support alternate methods of fueling our buses and making them more sustainable and more environmentally friendly. I'd like to see the city kind of take this idea when lobbying to federal and state funders about getting some more investment in our transit here in Bend. I'd also love to see the city kind of expand this idea of non-gas vehicles, including some other cities have experimented with doing subsidies for e-bikes. There's a city that does kind of a free rental, try out an e-bike, and then people, if they like it, they can go buy one. I'd love our city to encourage people to look at that mode of transportation. I will disclose I have an e-cargo bike. It's amazing how helpful it is in getting around town and sort of reducing some of those barriers to hopping on that mode of transportation. I'd also like to see, and I think it's in the works, our city electrify our own fleet and encourage, even if some things can be done with a quick trip on a bike or another mode of transportation that's not a gas-powered vehicle, let's encourage that. I'd also love the city, and this may be part of our climate action plan going forward too, talking about internally for all of the city employees. The city employs quite a few people. What are we doing to incentivize and encourage those people to take different ways of getting to work, including public transit? So I think this is a piece of a really good scheme of ideas about moving away from combustion vehicles that contribute to carbon emissions.
All right, thank you very much, Melanie. Second question now. Just waiting for the question to come up here. I got to say congratulations to the audience members on the first 3 questions that we've had. They were awesome. Oh, interesting question. Justin, are you ready?
Sure.
It says, they say to follow the money. What story do your donors tell you about your campaign?
Well, my donors to my campaigns thus far have largely been in business, small business, real estate, and building. Whether that's the Bend Chamber of Commerce PAC, the Central Oregon Association of Realtors, as previously mentioned, the Central Oregon Small Business PAC, and then individual donors that are also in the building trades particularly. I don't actually. The premise, I think, of the question actually is to say that you must be bought and paid for by certain donors. That's not the approach that I take. The approach I've always taken is being honest with people. Here's what I believe. Here are my positions. If those align with your positions, great, support me. If not, there's another candidate to evaluate. So I don't think that automatically means that I'm beholden to a certain lobby or anything. I listen to all people, whether they've donated or not, or whether they agree with me or not. And I've got a long track record of doing that with our neighborhood associations and all of our boards and committees as well.
All right, thank you very much. Same question to you, Melanie. Would you like me to read that? Can you see that?
I can see it. I've got it, Lee. Thanks. So first I want to frame my answer by reminding folks who may not know that in Oregon we don't have campaign finance donation limits. People can give as much as they'd like to. We do have some campaign finance reform coming to the ballot this fall, but that's the rules as they currently are. So I'm really proud to be supported by over 140 individual donors with an average donation under $100. In contrast, this year my opponent has received donations from just 3 PACs and 4 individuals with an average donation of over $3,000. That includes a $15,000 donation from the organization hosting this forum today. So I think my story of my people-powered campaign says my donations, the story they tell about me is that I will work for the people of Bend and listen to community members and industry leaders and make decisions based on my values and what Bend needs. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the candidates today for Bend City Council positions 1 and 4. A reminder, our next event in this series will be a forum for Bend City Council positions 2 and 3, and that will be on Wednesday afternoon, once again at noon, live streaming on Facebook and on YouTube. I want to thank our director and his crew, Kevin Reichel. Great job. Also want to thank our producer, Tyler Neese from the Central Oregon Association of Realtors. I want to thank you folks for attending today, and we hope you will attend Wednesday once again at noon. I'm Lee Anderson, News Channel 21. Thanks for watching.